Hey every squid, it's me, back again, and I'm just here to tell you this is not inspired or a rip-off in any way, shape, or form of a Jeff the Killer rewrite written by someone of the name of Pastra. You should go check out his channel, though, by the way. His channel's pretty good, if you're into horror stuff, at least. But anyways, let's get into the video. Eyeless Jack, written by yours truly. Jeff awoke from the lightning that boomed outside, the light illuminating the room for nothing more than a millisecond. Jeff found himself unable to move. Darn it, Jeff thought to himself. Another sleep paralysis dream. Jeff lay there, half asleep and also half awake. Unable to move any part of his body, so he couldn't roll off the bed to fall to the ground and awake, or to pinch himself or anything. He just sat there, staring at the ceiling until he heard a creaking noise coming from somewhere in the room. Jeff darted his eyes from around the room and saw the closet door cracked open just a smidge. This made Jeff worry. But he also knew this was just a dream, so he'd wake up any minute now. He was sure of it. He went back to staring at the ceiling, now feeling a little more anxious, but trying to pay no mind. And he heard it again. He looked back at the closet door. Now it was wide open. But all he could see from the closet door was pitch black darkness. Jeff's heartbeat grew louder, faster, and heavier. He could feel his heart beating through his chest. Jeff thought about calling out, "Hello?" since this was just a dream, so nothing would actually happen to him, but he chose not to. Besides, even if he did want to, he couldn't do it on the account that his body was still asleep. Lightning struck outside his window, light flooding into the room with raindrop shadows. The lightning revealing the room in the darkness once again. The only place it didn't hit was his closet, which now had a cold breeze that sent chills down every part of Jeff's body. Suddenly, Jeff could hear a low, deep breathing through the closet door. Maybe that was where the cold breeze was coming from, and something took a step out of his closet. Jeff couldn't make out the figure at first, but he soon saw it was a pitch-black humanoid figure with a blue mask. Eye holes of the mask leaked a thick black sludge that dripped onto the floor, burning the floor. It came closer and closer and closer towards Jeff. But he couldn't move, he couldn't scream. All he could do was watch as the figure crept toward the foot of his bed, and then to his side. It leaned towards Jeff's face. Some of the sludge dripped onto him, burning his skin like an inferno. Its breath flowed from beyond the black holes of the mask. It stared down at him, somehow, despite not having any eyes. None that were visible, to say the least. Jeff's breathing picked up pace. He didn't know what to do with this thing at his side. The creature stood back up, lifting its thin, shadowy hands up to its face, grasping onto its deep blue mask, and took it off. Jack heard a phone ringing in the distance, waking him up from a deep slumber. He sat up from his bed, looking down at his wife, kissing her before swiftly tiptoeing to the living room. Reaching the room, he made a dash to the phone right before it went to the answering machine. "Hello," Jack said with a raspy, low, tired tone in his voice, scratching his scruffy, bearded cheek. "Hey, Jack," a female's voice said, muffled from the phone. "We need you down here at a house nearby." "Another murder?" Jack said, knowing what's to come. Yes, the other girl said expectantly. Where to? Jack drove up into the house, police lights momentarily blinding him before he got up and out of the car, the waterfall pouring down from above him. "Hey there, Jack," a police officer said. "Good to see you again," another one said, too cheerfully. Jack said hi back, but also fought himself to roll his tired eyes. He eventually saw the police officer in question. He waved to her, saying, "Hey, Jessie." She responded, "Hey there, Jack," she said, both cheerfully and concerned. "So, what's the status for tonight?" "Well, it's the same as the other kills recently. Nothing any more different from the other victims of this mysterious killer." Jack rubbed his face as if fighting a migraine. "That's great to hear," Jack sighed. "We thought you would need to check it out anyway, since you're the detective and all." Yeah. I know this song and dance by now." "Great. Well, I'll lead you the way, I guess." "Yep." Jesse took him to the bedroom of this innocent victim. Blood leaked onto the ground. A sheet placed above the body. Jack slowly lifted the mat, seeing the corpse. The man's eyes were scratched out, his mouth in an elongated, screaming face, as though his jaw was ripped from its hinge. And its belly was scratched out, the kidneys being the only organs missing from the body. "I've always wondered why the kidneys," Jack muttered to himself. "Yep, quite the grisly sight, ain't it?" "Yes, indeed," Jack said, staring at the floor, seeing black sludge in the likeness of footprints leading up to the closet. He looked into the closet, nothing out of the ordinary, no signs of secret passageways. Granted, they're called secret passageways as to not be noticeable. "I wonder what this black sludge is," Jesse said, one knee to the ground, taking a closer look at the tar-like substance. "I don't know, but we could take this back to the lab to do a DNA test. Maybe it'll tell us exactly who this could be, or give us a good direction to who it could be." "I was thinking the same thing," Jessie said, taking a plastic bag out from her pocket, picking the sludge up through the bag and flipping it as if picking up dog poop. "Ow!" Jessie said, dropping the bag as she was doing this task. "That burns." "You okay?" Jack asked. "Yep, I'm fine," Jessie said, slightly in pain at the moment. Jack picked up the bag, sealing it shut without touching the thick liquid. He took it outside, walking to the car, thunder roaring in the distance as he stepped into his car, putting the baggie on the seat next to him. "I better go get this to the lab. Let me know if y'all find anything else notable." "Yes, sir," Jesse said, saluting to Jack. Jack saluted to Jesse before turning on the ignition and driving off to the distance. Getting home, he walked up the steps, glancing around the area, feeling as though he's being watched by two soulless eyes, and unlocks the door, stepping inside the door, creaking with its rusty hinges. "Honey, I'm home," Jack whispered to himself. As hungry as Jack felt, he went straight to bed. He could feel his eyes going bloodshot the longer he'd been out, so he ripped off his soaked clothing, put back on his PJs, and went back to bed, his wife still sleeping soundly next to him. The light from the window shined directly in his eyes as he awoke, sitting up from his bed. He glanced down next to him, his wife now missing from the bed. The aroma of bacon filled Jack's nostrils as he got up from his comfy bed. He walked into the kitchen, being greeted by his wife. "Good morning, sleepyhead." "Morning," Jack said, standing by the counter where his wife made bacon, eggs, and toast. "I know you gotta get ready for work soon, but I thought of making you a little meal before getting through the day," she said, laying a plate down, scraping the food off the pan and onto his plate. "Thanks, honey," Jack said, grabbing a fork. "Now eat up. I wouldn't want you to be even a second late for work," Marla said, scooping some more of the same breakfast, putting them on 2 other plates. "Mark, breakfast is ready," she called out. Their son, Mark, walked into the room soon after, rubbing his eyes. "Is that breakfast I smell?" he said jokingly. "Mm-hmm. Cool." After some family bonding at the breakfast table, Jack gobbled up his food before getting ready for work. More ready for the day than he usually did. Jack grabbed his car keys, kissing his wife goodbye and wishing his son a good day at school, ruffling his hair while he was at it. He left the house, getting in his car. He sat sitting in his car seat, starting up the engine. After a few tries, the engine stayed on. He drove off to the station, hoping that some clue had been found by now. "Hey, Jack," fellow officers greeted Jack as he entered the station. "Hey," he'd say to each person, feeling a lot less tired than last night. Jack walked into their documents room. Maybe he'd find something in a file that would give them a lead to who they're looking for. He unlocked the door, glancing over his shoulders to see if someone was watching him before entering. The walls and floor were filled with rows of filing cabinets, each with different letters and numbers. Jack started to go through every file. Compared cases from criminals from the past and present, and the victims of those criminals, and the deaths from this closet monster, but nothing was matching up with one another. All except for one. There was an incident before all of these murders happened. Someone of the name of Jack Finch, age 20, college student who had been kidnapped. His body was found near a canal, a blue mask with boiling hot tar leaking from the sides of the mask and eye holes. The lights flickered above Jack as he read about how he had cuts and bruises all over his body. The reason for his death, the people who killed him, it was unknown. But it did have a almost satanic symbol carved into the spots where his kidneys were once there. Jack wondered if maybe this dead person had something to do with the case. But the question was, how? He couldn't have killed them if he was dead. Maybe the people that had kidnapped him had something to do with the murders. Jack then took the file to study it some more and left the room. Jack walked into his office. It was dark, cold, and mysterious to Jack. Why are all the lights off? Jack thought to himself. He flipped the light switch in his room. A warm orange glow flickered on above him as the light came on. He saw his wooden desk, a old green and gold lamp, papers scattered messily all over his desk, a bookshelf behind his squeaky desk chair, the leather peeling off the chair, a cupboard in the corner of the room. That's when Jack noticed something off. The window was opened. His blinds were closed, but they were moving as the wind blowed toward them. He shut the door behind him, walking up to the window slowly, latching onto the drawstring and swiftly yanked it, opened the blinds to reveal the outdoors. He wasn't sure why he'd think there would be someone standing there, but he was glad there wasn't. Maybe someone just opened the window to let in some fresh air. I would have sooner if I weren't so busy. Jack sighed in relief, closing the window. Then he saw something in the reflection. He saw someone standing behind him wearing a blue robe, red stain in the sleeves, and the cupboard now open. Jack pretended not to notice him, closing the blinds before leaping at the figure behind him, tackling the person in the blue robe. He tried to lift up the hood, but he kicked him back, knocking the wind out of his lungs. He struggled to breathe. He, now on his knees, looked up before something thwacked against his head. Everything cut into black. He woke up, tied up, the room completely dark, a single light flickering above him, almost blinding him. Whispering echoed around him. What's going on? Jack said, almost drunkenly, talking to someone in the room. He wasn't sure who, or even what he was talking to, but he didn't care. It's time for our master to gain his vessel, and I believe you're going to be our next victim, isn't he? One voice said. That's why I kidnapped him, idiot, another said angrily. Jack struggled in his wooden chair. Two cold hands came out of the darkness, grabbing his shoulders, making him freeze in place. I've got something special just for you, another person said, their face engulfed in shadows, but he could see their bright blue eyes, almost as if they glowed in the darkness. Jack felt afraid. He didn't know what he meant by something special, but he didn't want to find out, even if he was going to. Another light buzzed and flickered on, and he finally saw someone else. It was two people wearing blue robes, their hoods covering their face, making their faces nothing but pitch black darkness, except their eyes. Despite they're not glowing, even though they weren't, but somehow, in some way, he could see their eyes, their deep blue eyes. Some looked fake, like they were wearing contact lenses. Some looked more natural, but they were blue nonetheless. The two were holding something, a wooden bucket, something bubbling and brewing inside. He feared the worst. They walked closer, Jack now able to get a better view. It was boiling hot oil, similar as described to Jack about this Jack killer. Bucket reeked of the hot oil, steaming like a fog machine, and one of the cult members held a inky dark rag soaked with the oil of past victims, or so Jack assumed. They wrapped the rag around Jack's mouth as he struggled to try and keep the cold, wet washcloth off his bearded face. Then they put an equally wet mask, once the color of a dark blue, now black with oil staining the mask. They put it on his face. He was almost able to keep it off, but they got him to wear it anyways. The mask was wet in the inside. He could feel the drops of oil dripping down his face, his vision obscured from the mask, but he could still see. They yanked his hair. He screamed, now muffled from both the rag and the mask, and dunked his head into the oil. The mask filled up with oil as he felt himself drowning. He could feel his face being burned. It felt like fire singed his face off as he drowned. Right before he felt his life slip away, his head was lifted from the oils. He gasped for air. some of the oil dripping into his mouth from the rag and mask covering his face. But Jack didn't care. He was just glad he could breathe again. But they then shoved his head back into the oil, starting the cycle all over again. Marla sat on the couch. The television's bright light illuminated the darker room by now. She had just gone off a phone call with the police as they head to search for Jack. Marla wouldn't usually watch TV so late at night, but she wanted to get her mind off Jack being missing. He usually stayed out late at night during his job. He always tried to solve his cases as soon as he got them. She was never sure why exactly, but this was far later than he would be out without calling Marla at the very least. Then she heard it, the doorbell ring. Marla rushed to the door, almost knowing it was Jack. She wasn't sure if she'd cry in his arms or yell at him for being back so late without saying a word. But whatever she was going to do, she was glad he was home. Marla yanked the door open, and seeing no one, no sign of someone, all she heard was the rain pouring down and the thunder booming in the distance. But she did see something in the corner of her eye. She looked down and screamed. She saw Jack laying on the ground. His face had burnt scars all over it, slashes in his uniform and skin as he bled onto the floor, the rain washing it away. Jack was tied up, a filthy rag wrapped around his mouth. Marla was relieved he was still breathing. She wouldn't know what she'd do if Jack was dead. He appeared passed out, which she preferred over him being dead. Marla dragged him inside, immediately calling the police. "Hey there, Marla. Now, I know we're still searching for Jack, but," an operator started before being interrupted. "I found Jack," Marla yelled, unsure of why yelling instead of telling. "You did? Well, that's great." "Yes, but he's majorly hurt," Marla said, untying Jack as she was holding the kitchen phone to her neck. "What's the problem with him?" He has a burnt-looking face, scars all over him. He was all tied up when I found him." The opera was silent for a moment before they continued. "Is he breathing?" "Yes," Marla said, relieved that her husband was alive. The operator sighed in relief, saying, "All right, we'll send someone over." "Thank you," Marla said, practically in tears. "It will be okay. I'm sure he will be okay, Marla," the operator said, soft. After Marla hung up the phone, she noticed Jack starting to wake up. What's going on? Where am I?" Jack said, weakly. "It's gonna be fine, Jack. We'll take care of you," Jesse said, almost patting Jack on his arm if it weren't for his wounds. The paramedics carried Jack off to be taken care of. A police officer interrogated Marla and checked around the premises, shining flashlights into the woods that surrounded the house, but no one was found. Even if they did, how would they know that they were the kidnapper? They couldn't. After a day or two at the hospital, Jack was finally allowed to go back home. Soon Jack got dressed up. "Where do you think you're going?" Marla asked, her hands on her hips as if she caught Jack sneaking out late at night. "I'm going to work," Jack said, confused and worried. "But you just got back home. Shouldn't you stay a little while before you go back to work? You still need time to heal." Marla pointed out the bandages that wrapped around multiple spots around Jack's body. "Well, I need to solve this case," Jack said, turning around, half pretending to be dramatic, but still truth in his words. Marla sighed. "All right," Marla continued. You can go to work tonight, but I expect you to stay home for at least a week afterwards, Marla said strictly, but also concerned for Jack. Fine, Jack said, almost in a whisper, and leaving out the door. He drove up to the station, one cop standing outside. He wondered why, though. It was pouring outside, as it normally did, and they never had someone wait outside like a bodyguard. But even if they had, this person was holding a cigarette in his hands, swiftly flicking it away as Jack got out of the car, his coat now becoming soaked. "There you are. I was expecting you," the officer said in a low, tired tone. "I mean, I do work here," Jack said, walking up to the door. The automatic door slowly slid open. Jack attempted to walk in, but the officer slid his arm in front of Jack, blocking his path. Jack looked at the man confused. "Sorry, Jack. I don't know if you were given the note, but the chief is giving you a 2-week-long vacation and won't allow you to come in until that 14 days is up." "Is that so? But I'm the only detective in this town," Jack said, exasperated. The officer shrugged. "That's what I was told to do. Sorry, pal," lifting a mug of coffee up to his lips, putting the cup down. He now had a coffee mustache. Jack groaned. He got back in his car, defeated. It's like people think I'm broken beyond repair. I may hate thinking about what happened while I was in the hands of those people, but I can still do my job, right? Jack thought to himself, feeling a tear slipping down his face and dripping down his chin and onto his shirt, which covered his bandages. Drove back home, the rain pouring down harder now. He heard thunder and saw the quick beam of lightning, and before Jack could even notice, he started to feel tired. His eyes felt like bricks were tied to his eyelids, forcing them down, but he tried and tried to keep them up. It felt like hours had gone by, and he was still driving. He saw his home in the distance somehow. Almost there, he thought to himself. Just a little further. The light didn't shine too far, to the point he wondered why he even had his headlights on at that point. And suddenly, a figure popped out of the distance. Jack slammed on his brakes. The car skidded on the road, scratching his tires against the road with a loud screech as he slid closer to the figure from the slippery road. He nearly hit the person in front of him, the car stopping right in front of the person. Jack walked out of the car to say sorry to them, but the figure was gone. He barely saw the figure. All he knew was that they were wearing a black sweatshirt masking his face. But now they're gone. Less so like they ran away, but more like they vanished out of thin air. It was strange, but that was the best way Jack could put it. "What the heck?" Jack thought to himself. Where did they go? He noticed his bandages had now started to get wet, even though he wore his coat. So after much hesitation, he got back in his car and continued his way home. Marla sat at her old sofa. It was worn, but still comfortable. She was now knitting something. She wasn't sure exactly what she was making and who it was for, but she was making something to get her mind off Jack. She was concerned for him. She didn't even know why she allowed him to go off to work after whatever he went through, an experience he didn't even try to tell her. Whatever it was, it must have been bad. Then she heard the car pull up outside. A smile grew on her face, happy to see him again. Drove back home, the rain pouring down harder now. he heard thunder and saw the quick beam of lightning. And before Jack could even notice, he started to feel tired. His eyes felt like bricks were tied to his eyelids, forcing them down. But he tried and tried to keep them up. It felt like hours had gone by, and he was still driving. He saw his home in the distance somehow. Almost there, he thought to himself, just a little further. The light didn't shine too far, to the point he wondered why he even had his headlights on at that point. And suddenly, a figure popped out of the distance. Jack slammed on his brakes. The car skidded on the road, scratching his tires against the road with a loud screech as he slid closer to the figure from the slippery road. He nearly hit the person in front of him, the car stopping right in front of the person. Jack walked out of the car to say sorry to them, but the figure was gone. He barely saw the figure. All he knew was that they were wearing a black sweatshirt masking his face. But now they're gone. Less so like they ran away, but more like they vanished out of thin air. It was strange, but that was the best way Jack could put it. What the heck? Jack thought to himself. Where'd they go? He noticed his bandages had now started to get wet, even though he wore his coat. So after much hesitation, he got back in his car and continued his way home. Marla sat at her old sofa. It was worn, but still comfortable. She was now knitting something. She wasn't sure exactly what she was making and who it was for, but she was making something to get her mind off Jack. She was concerned for him. She didn't even know why she allowed him to go off to work after whatever he went through, an experience he didn't even try to tell her. Whatever it was, it must have been bad. Then she heard the car pull up outside. A smile grew on her face, happy to see him again. She put her knitting down on the table, stand it up, walk into the door. She opened the door, right as Jack was about to open it. He stepped inside, dripping onto the hard wooden floor. So how'd it go? Marla asked, knowing what he was going to say next. They wouldn't let me in to do my job. They gave me 2 weeks vacation before I can go back, Jack said almost lifelessly. I'm sorry, Marla continued, but I did tell them how you shouldn't go to work for now. They already had plans of it themselves. What? Jack said angrily. But I have to solve this case. If I don't, then... Jack cut himself off. Then what? Marla said, almost scared of her angered husband. A strange, utterly long silence filled the room as Jack picked out his next words carefully. Never mind, Jack eventually said, calming himself down. How about you get some rest, Marla said, holding onto Jack's bandaged arm, being careful not to put too much pressure on his wounds. Jack stared into space for a moment, feeling lifeless in a way, but after what felt like an eternity, he responded, "Alright." Jack walked into the bedroom. Marla sat back down on her chair to work on her knitting project before heading to bed with him. Jack walked into his room. It felt gloomier than it normally did. The thunder roared outside, the rain splashing down like a kitchen sink. Jack sat on his bed. He felt defeated. He didn't know what he was going to do, so he just sat there. It felt like days staring outside the dark window, the trees brushing from the wind which called to Jack. Jack felt tears run down his face. Jack decided he would allow himself to cry, not loudly or even make a sound. He just let his tears flow from his eyes. He hated the fact he couldn't continue working on this case. If this was with any other cases like this, he'd be excited, but this was personal to Jack. "Honey," Marla said tiredly, no louder than a whisper. Jack jumped a bit, turning around to meet face to face with her. "What are you doing still up?" she asked, putting her hand to her chest in a concerned manner. "I'm fine. It's just..." Jack paused for a moment, not knowing what he'd want to say to Marla. "The case," he completed his sentence, hoping that Marla would understand what he was talking about. "What about it?" Marla nudged to get Jack to spill the beans, disappointing Jack in his hope of her knowing what he was talking about, or to let it go. Marla sat beside Jack. "Nothing," Jack said, trying to avoid her question. Marla sat beside Jack. "Nothing," Jack said, trying to avoid her questions. "Well, it's obviously not nothing, or else you wouldn't be getting so worked up about this one case. You've done so many murder cases in the past. What makes this one so different?" "It's dumb." Jack got up from the bed, walking to the window. "Well, it clearly isn't if it's stuck with you since you first got the case," Marla said, her anger building. Jack sighed. He knew he wasn't getting out of this. "Well, not too long ago, before I joined the detective force," Jack spoke, feeling himself go into a long story he'd be a narrator of, having flashbacks of a time he wished to forget. "I went to go visit my mom for her birthday. She was a bit ill at the moment, so she asked me to stay the night until her nurse would come by to help her out. The old one was fired for mistreating her, without getting into much detail. But anyway, she wanted me to stay the night, so I obliged. During the middle of the night, I heard a thud coming from her bedroom door. I wouldn't have paid any mind to it if we were the only ones there. Even if we weren't, I just had a sense of danger from it, even if I was never sure why. So I went to go check on her, just in case, after building my courage for just a second. I went to investigate. I know what people in horror movies say about investigating, but this wasn't just for my sake. It was also for my mom's, or so I tell myself. I still need you to heal your wounds before you can go back to work, okay?" Marla finished her sentence. Jack was upset with Marla, but he knew that by that point, that it wouldn't really matter what he wanted now. "If not for yourself, for me and Mark, okay?" Marla spoke softly. "Okay," Jack said, barely a whisper. "Now go to bed. I'll be right back," Marla said, walking to the bathroom. Jack lay down into bed, put the blanket over himself and closed his eyes, and felt himself drifting to sleep. Marla later came out of the bathroom and laid beside Jack. He was fast asleep by now. He finally felt himself smiling, what felt like the first time all week. She loved Jack, but she'd become more concerned for him. It felt like lately he'd been spending less and less time with her and their son, all for this case he hadn't been able to solve in a few months, and yet he was still unable to give up. Marla would be proud of him if it weren't for the fact that he was ruining his own health because of it. So she went to bed in the hopes that maybe Jack will finally be able to relax for what would be the first time in probably 3 months, maybe even more. She'd lost count at that point. She closed her eyes and went to bed, softly and soundfully. Jack woke up in the middle of that night, now unable to move. His eyes darted around the room. This had never happened to him before, but it scared him. He tried to say something to his wife, but he was unable to open his mouth. All he was able to get out was a muffled sound, undistinguishable from a normal word. Jack finally had an idea. Maybe this is just one of those occurrences of a thing called sleep paralysis, Jack thought to himself. Jack continued to lay there, unable to move for what felt like an eternity. He saw a shadowy figure here and there from the boom and lightning in the distance, but Jack wanted to keep his composure just in case. But then he heard noises in the distance beyond his bedroom door. Jack tried to wake up. Maybe someone had broken in, but he wouldn't. His body wouldn't allow him to do so. Footsteps echoed through his house, progressively getting louder and faster as time went on before they stopped at his bedroom door. Jack's heart was beating so loud, he was concerned if the creature outside his door would hear him. The door slowly creaked open, darkness enveloping his hallway. Jack was now starting to sweat, his eyes growing wider. A blue mask slid across the floor, a mixture of blood and that same black sludge trailing behind it. The mask was now stained with blood on it, the paint chipping off, the tarry substance leaking out of the eye holes of the mask. Jack felt more and more uneasy about this. It felt familiar, even though he'd never experienced it before. A shadowy hand reached into the darkness as a creature crawling on all fours, its face obscured by it looking at the ground. It grabbed its mask before getting on its two shadowy legs, holding the mask right in front of its face, stepping toward Jack. The figure looked almost two-dimensional and stopped at the foot of his bed. Jack could feel the air get colder, the thunder in the distance becoming further away. Despite the storm not going anywhere, Jack could feel himself shaken uncontrollably. The things leaned forwards towards him, removing the mask from its obscured face. Marla woke up that night. She felt like she needed to check on Jack. It was a feeling that felt like someone was whispering in her ear. So she sat up from her bed, looking beside her, and Jack wasn't there. Where could he have gone? She didn't know. Marla panicked, looking around for Jack. A note, a phone number even. But she didn't find anything. But that's when she noticed something. A red trail similar to that of blood, and a half-eaten kidney. A black gooey substance oozing off it like a thick, tarry slime. So I went to her room. I crept through the hallways, hearing a sound. I'm not so sure how to describe it, but I went to her room, her bedroom door now wide open, and I walk in just to see her laying in her bed, dead. Her eyes scratched out, her kidneys grimly ripped out of her body. One was lying on the floor, a black, tarry-like substance that oozed off her half-eaten kidney. I called the police, hired a detective when there was another one at the time, and absolutely nothing came out of it. Jack paused to catch his breath. And I vowed from that day on, I would find a way to solve this case, even if it meant it would be my death. Jack finished his story. Marla felt bad for Jack, but she still knew that Jack had to stay home until he's healed. Well, I understand that you feel the need to solve this case, but I don't feel like I do. I know I do, Jack interrupted Marla.